Hey guys, thanks for joining us on our live technique session. Today we're going to be running through the squat. There's a lot of variations of squats, so today we'll just be working with the back squat and the barbell squat. For those of you that don't know, this is my husband, Nathan Wallace. And we're here today at Hold Your Own on the Gold Coast. This video will be available for you guys now to be able to re-watch whenever you guys get a chance, so it's yours to keep. So let's start with, what is a squat?
So here at Hold Your Own, we genuinely try to teach us a squat is the deepest you can go in a safe mechanical position. So with a squat, we try to ideally try and get people to go below parallel. What's below parallel? As I'll show Sophie, so what below parallel is, as you can see, is we want to try and make sure that hip crease here is just below the knee height. Ideally, for if you were going to do a powerlifting competition, this is the actual depth that people need to get to actually have a passed squat. And it's a position that we try to teach everyone that comes in here to get to. So there are limitations and different things that do limit that. So many different limitations to squatting, but we will go through a couple. So first one, which is quite a common one, is the long femur. So people with a long femur, what you'll quite often find is as you can see, this line here is our center line of gravity. This is ideally where the bar path wants to travel up and down. If the bar path starts traveling forward, the weight is now forward of us and it's going to cause issues. Same as if it goes backwards. If it goes backwards, we're going to fall backwards. So this is our bar path. So what you'll see here is the long femur, which is our bone, which is along the quadriceps muscle. If we have a long femur, generally what happens is we have to start pushing our bum a long way back past the center line of gravity. Therefore, what happens is the increased angle at the hip is going to increase, also making the torso lean further forward. So that's a general concern of what with the long femur. Short femurs. So people with short femurs, you'll often find this is kind of the ideal situation when you've got somebody. Short femur means the torso is going to be able to stay more upright, meaning that there's going to be less torque through the hips and less torque through the knees. So long shins. With the long shins, so you've got obviously different lengths. So you don't just have the femur that's long and short. You've got long shins. Someone with a long shin, you'll often find that the knee actually has to go a long way past the toes. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more depth a little bit later on. But what this does is also increase the angle at the knee, coming back, and you'll find that the femur is now a little bit different center line of gravity, and then the torso is sort of in a different, depending on how long and short the torso is, different angle of the torso there. Long and short torso, so long torso here, so you'll find that with a long torso, this person is actually able to be able to keep a more upright torso position, just purely because there's going to be, if they had a short one, if you shorten the length of the torso, it has to lean further forward to get that bar on their back into the center line of gravity. With a long length torso, they can sort of stand up a little bit longer because that's what the bar positioning sort of straightens them up a little bit there. So there's a couple of different sort of squat mechanics and different length of limbs that are available or people have. But there's plenty more, and there's so many different variations. So
a lot of these questions that we are going to cover today are the questions that I personally get asked a lot on Instagram, and they are varying from different person to person. But majority of the questions asked we can generally cover as a wider demographic for majority of people. So the first one, we've got the benefits of squatting below parallel. A lot of people do call this a deep squat, a low squat, ass to grass squat. So what are the benefits of a below parallel squat?
So generally with a below parallel squat, ass to grass squat.
Do you want me to demonstrate that again?
Yep, so again what we're trying to find is that where that hip crease is now below the knee, it's generally called a deep squat. And again, it's something that we try and teach here at Hold Your Own. So the benefits of deep squatting, what we do is the longer the range of motion that we can create, the more muscle recruitment that we're going to gather. So if we can get down and the deeper that we go, we're causing more of a stretch through the quadriceps, more of a stretch through the glute, more of a stretch through the hamstring. So we're creating more of a stretch through those main muscles. We're going to recruit more muscle fibers, being able to actually A, get stronger quicker, B, grow more muscle. So, and when we're trying to,
that seems to be the goal a lot at the moment, booty growth.
Yeah, so for people trying to grow a booty, those type of things, you'll find that squatting to depth is definitely going to be greater, just generally because the greater stretch to that glute max is going to create more muscle in that area. So that's obviously the main benefit to it, is along with a couple of others which we'll answer in a bit in other questions there.
Okay, so a lot of people ask me how many sets, how many reps, and how do you know what the perfect rep range and set range is? A lot of people are saying that they're squatting 100 times a day, 150 times a day. How many squats should they be doing? If they're weighted, if they're air squats, if they're not using any weight, what's the weight range?
So there's no real specific number for this. What we want to try and do is, over a period of time, we're trying to increase volume, total volume. So volume is actual weight times reps times sets. There's so many ways to go about this, and there's different rep ranges. Yes, there is different rep ranges which will claim to have better hypertrophy benefits, better strength benefits. So generally your 1 to sort of 6 mark is your power range. That's where you're going to create the most amount of power and strength. From there, you've got your sort of the 6 to 15 rep mark. 6 to 15 rep mark is your hypertrophy range. That's where generally you're going to create a little bit more muscle growth, purely because of blood volume as well there. You've got your third range, which we like to say is muscular endurance range. So the muscular endurance range is 15 plus, really. So, and depending on your goals, it will be depending on where you push those rep ranges.
So let's say, for example, a girl was squatting, say, 20 to 30 reps. That's definitely not the ideal rep range for muscle growth?
Probably not. So if you were to go wanting muscle growth, you'd probably be looking towards trying to limit that back towards that sort of 6 to 15 rep mark. Sets wise, again, it's about accumulating volume throughout week to week to week. If you're trying to accumulate more volume, you can do that through a numerous amount of ways. Increase weight, increase the amount of sets that you're doing, increase the amount of reps that you're doing. If you're programming properly, what you should be able to do is be able to slowly increase weight week to week to week, while slightly adjusting sets and slightly adjusting reps.
Awesome, I think we've got that one covered. So testing 1RMs, which is your 1 rep max, you cannot physically do any more reps. How can you do that in a safe way and be able to know your abilities?
So firstly, I think testing a 1RM is quite important. It's creating a limitation on where your strength is. If you can get someone that's teaches you properly how to test your 1RM, all of a sudden you have a set strength goal. You know exactly, this is where my strength is. If I am to improve, I want to increase more muscle mass, I need to increase that one rep max, generally speaking. So testing for 1RMs in a safe way, definitely try and look for a coach that's fully qualified and knows what they're doing and practices what they preach.
More than just a PT though, it's more of a strength coach, a powerlifting coach, somebody that really knows how to do those lifts.
Someone that practices what they preach, pretty much. So if you have someone who goes in, does powerlifting competitions, you see in the gym training, looks like they're squatting right, they have the qualifications behind them as well, they've done some strength and conditioning courses, definitely the way to go. Try and go and seek out that person, or online. There's plenty of good online coaches these days that are actually able to properly teach you and correct you through video analysis of how to squat better, bench better, deadlift better.
And we'll also teach you guys as well, if you are testing yourself with your 1 rep max, how to do it safely in a squat rack as well, if you are just going on your own.
If you are in a gym, probably the best thing to go. There's a term called RPE, rate of perceived perception. So what you want is exertion, rate of perceived exertion. So what we can do is, with rate of perceived exertion, you probably want to go around that sort of 9.5. 9.5 means it was hard, you probably had maybe 1 rep there, or it was a 1 rep max, but it didn't start to get to that ugly stage. So probably want to sort of go around that point. If you're really pushing the boundaries and it's starting to affect your form, especially if you're by yourself and you haven't got a coach there, I probably wouldn't go to that sort of extent of 1 RM max.
Okay. Next question. Using a belt. This is one that I get asked a lot, especially considering that I'm now 6 months postpartum after having the twins. Everyone always sees that I have a belt on when I squat, when I deadlift and do a lot of heavy compounding movements. So do you want to explain the benefits of why I personally wear a belt and the benefits of why everybody wears belts?
Okay, so the reason for belts are, it's pretty much so you can be able to give your abdominal area somewhere to push against. That's the most basic term for it. So we are creating space for the abdominal wall. So as Sophie is showing, so it's nice and tight. You're creating enough space for the abdominal wall to have pressure against. The way of doing this is pretty much through breathing and tensing through the belt. What's this doing? It's able to support our whole core. So our core is all the muscles supporting the spine. So if you're breathing in, you're tensing all the abdominal wall against the belt, all of a sudden you have a safety, sort of like a safety guard there, and somewhere so you can press against. Without a belt, I still recommend squatting without a belt in certain periods of times. It will help increase a little bit of core strength and stability more so. But like I said, there's nothing wrong with squatting with a belt. It just helps you be able to create a space safely for your abdominal wall to push against, creating more abdominal pressure as well. Knee sleeves.
Oh, sorry, I'll just go back onto belts for a minute. A lot of questions that I always get through is about my postpartum abdominal separation that I did get and the belt that I was using during that period. So my abdominal separation is now closed, or as close to closed as it'll ever be. It's 1 centimetre, which is, as the physios describe, pretty much normal. I think up to 2 fingers, 1 centimetre is considered a normal range of abdominal separation. Prior to that being closed, I was using my SRC recovery shorts, which was basically a compression wear that I would wear underneath my leggings or my shorts that would hold everything tight together, just to make sure that I did engage my cores. It reminded me to always hold, squeeze before I did anything, any rep, anything at all, which really helped for me and to be able to close my abdominal separation. We won't talk too much about that today, but that might be a video for the future that we will cover if you guys are interested in that.
And that's something else that Sophie mentioned there. The belt's a really good reminder to be able to embrace and brace your core. So having it there, it's really good sort of, okay, you know that the belt's on you, know it's nice and tight, to breathe in and push against that belt and really brace the core there.
Yeah, it's such a good point. When you've got it on and you push against it with your core as you're squatting, it really, really makes sure that you hold on to it. It reminds you every single rep to hold on. Yeah, I can't recommend a belt highly enough.
And so with knee sleeves, so you'll see a lot of people now squatting around on videos and YouTube and everything with knee sleeves. The great thing with knee sleeves are there is a numerous amount of benefits, and we'll go through just a couple of the basic ones. A, creates warmth in the knee, so it's creating better blood flow through that knee joint area. If you can create more warmth and blood through that area, it's going to be more lubricated, which means you're going to have less pain through the knee. Especially for someone who's squatting heavy and also squatting numerous amounts of times, frequency is quite high. Really good to just make sure that you've got some good blood flow going through the knee and the warmth going through the knee. The other thing is just proprioception. The awareness of where your knee space is. So it gives you that awareness that where your knee is in space. That's pretty much what proprioception is. So when you hit that bottom, you know exactly kind of where your knee space is and where to sort of again come back out of. It just increases that slightly. So really good to sort of have that mental awareness of how deep you're going each time you squat.
Does it reduce the risk of injury?
It can reduce the risk of injury slightly. Again, like I said, if you're increasing warmth and blood flow and through the knee, better blood flow like I said, it's going to help lubricate that knee joint, and more lubricated knee joint means that the knee socket can actually slide a little bit better. So yeah, definitely can reduce injury.
So the next one that I have got on the board is core stability. So we did cover this a little bit just before. So your core strength is your essential important muscle groups in every movement that you do. So what are some essential core exercises to build your strength up with squatting?
So something that we go through quite often with people trying to improve core strength and core stability, really basic movement, but I think it's probably the most important movement when it comes to core stability is the basic plank. We can go through planks a little bit later, but being able to brace that core, it's simulating what you need to do when you do a squat. So when you do a plank, you're on your all fours, you're on your elbows and you're on your toes. You want to try and brace and squeeze that core and practice breathing in as well. So big breath in, then brace the core and hold for a certain period of time, maybe sort of 3 to 5 seconds. That's sort of simulating what you need to do when you squat, when you breathe. And then breathing out, and then taking another big breath in, then tensing the core again, and then bracing and holding again for 3 to 5 seconds. It's an exercise that we go through with a lot of our clients here to help have that mental awareness of what they should do when they go through a squat or a deadlift especially as well.
I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but with the breathing, because we're talking about it at the moment, I know that you will discuss it when we do get onto the bar a bit further, but breathing, you've obviously mentioned quite a few times today, and obviously is a very important factor when you're squatting.
Probably the most underrated aspect of the squat that there could possibly be. We've had numerous amount of clients come, and by just making sure that they're taking in a big enough breath, it's improved their squat by anywhere from 5 to 10%.
I find that a lot of people tend to hold their breath when they are squatting, so if they're doing 5 reps, they won't actually take a breath in between, they'll hold their breath, and it won't allow them to be able to keep lifting or do more reps or lift heavier because they're not using their breath correctly. So what is the correct way to hold your breath when you are squatting?
So when we're squatting, what we want to try and do is, like I said, we want to try and increase the amount of volume inside our diaphragm and inside our core. That's also creating more stability throughout our core. So big breath in. We want to try and breathe into the belly first and then in through the lung. There's a bit of
give us an example?
It's a bit of a technique that you can actually practice, and I've practiced numerous amounts of times over and over again, and I still practice to this day of just how to get my breath right. So what you want to try and do is you want to try and breathe into the bottom of your belly, so into the bottom of your belly and bottom of your lungs, then into your lungs. Then also what you're being able to do is you're able to create more oxygen inside you, more air inside you, creating more volume inside your chest cavity, inside your abdominal area, creating more stability. Then everything can push out against that rib cage, push out against that abdominal wall, and like I said, more stability there. So big breaths in. As you breathe in, you want to try and hold that breath. Think of oxygen or breathing as you press your canisters. So big breath in, lungs are nice and compressed, or nice and pressed up, so you're pressed up against the rib cage. Hold that breath, drop down, keep holding it. You don't want to let breath out at the bottom of your squat. All of a sudden, if you let your breath out at the bottom of your squat, what's going to happen is you deflate. If you deflate at the bottom of your squat, you're going to find that you're going to fold forward, and then you can potentially lose the squat, especially forward. So hold that breath majority of the way through your squat, and then I have a saying is when you breathe out is when you're breaking the surface. So as you sort of get to that sort of second half of your movements, or second half of the top movement, you want to breathe out and break the surface as if you're sort of coming up for air through water when you're at the beach. So
I'll make sure that he covers all of this when we are on the bar, and to also cue me so that you guys are well aware of the things that I'm doing. Because I have been squatting for a while now, I do it without noticing. So Nath will make sure that there's cues so that you guys can understand exactly what I'm doing and when I'm doing it, and the reason behind doing it from what we're saying now is what we'll be doing on the bar as well.
Yeah, so, and it's one of those things where when you think you've taken in a big enough breath, you can usually take in some more. So
anyone that's seen your videos, he's always got the biggest red face. He breathes really deep, and it's a running joke around here because he's breathing when he squats. It's
to the point where I almost start shaking because I'm trying to get so much oxygen inside. So yes.
Okay, so we'll move on to the variations of squats. So today we're literally just going to talk about a barbell back squat. There's so many different variations of squats. lot out there. And if you guys do want us to cover these topics, please let us know so that we will do another video on them. But today we are just doing the barbell or the back squat. So do you want to talk about a bit about the variations that we do have available?
So you've got so many different variations, and there's almost too many to
so many
talk about. But the most basic ones, you've got so you've got your back squat, and there's a couple of different variations of the back squat too. And we'll go through those as well when we're actually going through squatting. You've got front squats. You've got where the bar is travelling across your chest.
Or kettlebell or other weight on your front.
On your front there. You've got a pause squat. Pause squat is where you go down to the bottom position of your squat, pause for a period of time before the up part.
What are some of the benefits of that? Just quickly.
Pause squat's really good for helping teaching people stability, teaching people's depth. Helping people create power out of the bottom of the squat. If you're stopping at the bottom of the squat, you're stopping that sort of that muscle elasticity effect. So if you stop that, you're going to have to create your own power out of the bottom. So if you go back to squatting with a normal sort of range of motion and bounce out of the bottom, you're going to be able to have that more power to get up.
I personally do a variation of all different types of squats every week just to really make sure that I am getting my full range of motion. Every muscle group is engaged for my squats, and I find every single one has a different benefit. So we will cover that maybe at a later date. But box squats?
And box squats again is it's pretty similar to a pause squat. It teaches you stability, also teaches people depth, so if you can get someone who's struggling to have that confidence to drop their hips into the right position. If you can get them just to squat onto a box, it's a lot more simpler for some people, so it helps teach people to find that depth.
And it also builds confidence while they're learning to squat as well. So box squats are great for beginners who are just learning to squat.
It's a common thing that we use. So we have a pure beginner coming in to learn how to squat, and they don't have that confidence to be able to go down to the bottom. Try and teach them, okay, just squat onto a box. It's pretty simple, sitting onto a chair.
Hand placement and why, we will go through that when I'm on the bar, because otherwise it might be a little bit hard to demonstrate. So we'll move on to the next one, which is knees over the toes. Now, I can't tell you the amount of times that people have commented on my squat, a squat, on our social media accounts, drilling us for the technique that we use, because we do let our knees go over our toes, and it is just a myth. And I know that a lot of personal training companies and schools do teach this as a generic sort of basis of teaching, but would you like to explain a little bit further in depth of why it's not such a taboo thing?
Okay, so knees over toes, yes, massive myth.
To demonstrate it now.
Yep. So if you find that most people when they're searching depth will find that their knee travels over their toe. So what happens is when the knee travels over the toe, we do create more torque at the knee joint. Yes. So there was a study done 20-30 years ago saying that there's going to be more torque over the knee joint if the knee travels forward the toe. This is potentially, it is true. So the more the knee actually travels forward, so past our center line of gravity, so the more it travels past our center line of gravity, there is more torque at the knee. The problem with this study was it didn't show if this was actually detrimental to the actual knee. So we don't actually know whether that extra torque on the knee is something that the knee can't handle. So the study was flawed straight from the get-go. The other thing is, if we were to push the hips backwards, so just move backwards further, so push your bum backwards, the more the bum goes backwards, so push your bum back, the more we push the bum backwards, what that does is, lift the bum a little bit more, it creates more torque now at the hip. So we've taken the torque away from the knee and put it into the hip. So the same torque is still there. So we'll go back up to the top now. If we were to reduce that and say, tell people not to get to depth because the knee is going to travel forward over the toe, what we're going to do is now people can now create more torque to the knee by just adding more weight. So people are going to add more weight to the bar because they're squatting shorter, so they can squat heavier, but that's going to create more torque to the knee. So what's worse? We're still creating more torque to the knee. Now we're just creating it through more weight compared to the knee travelling forward. And again, like I said, we don't know if it's actually more detrimental to the knee. There's been no actual scientific study saying that it is more detrimental to the knee. So complete myth.
And everything that we teach here is based on evidence and scientific research that we personally and everyone in here does. So at the moment there's no studies to say that it's detrimental.
Yeah, and the more the knee travels forward, the more torque we're going to get through the quadriceps as well. And then if we push it back, the more torque we're going to get through the hip and through the glute and hamstring area. So it depends on what you want to work on. But like I said, if you were to potentially move on to the toes, there is going to be a lot more torque through that knee joint. And again, there isn't any study to show if it's detrimental to the knee. But if you can keep something where it's neutral and comfortable towards you, you're probably going to be in a safe position there.
Okay, so moving on to shoes. This one's a big one because, especially for me, I personally love Nikes. I love the look of them and I love to train in them. So Nathan, on the other hand, hates me training in them, does not like me training in them. So I have recently went and bought these ones. Would you like to explain the benefits of me wearing these versus my pretty little pink ones?
Okay, so I should have had a little demonstration of a few different shoes, but what we'll do is I'll just talk about them. So with these shoes, these are the new shoes that Nike have come out for, specifically kind of for lifting, for CrossFitters. What it is that the actual shoe itself is actually a flat sole shoe underneath. So it's really flat to the shoe. The shoes that Sophie was wearing beforehand, they usually had a slightly higher heel to ball the foot. What that's doing is it's creating a forward momentum of the foot. They're made for running, so running shoes are made to make you go forward. The last place we kind of want to be in the squat is in a forward position. I'll move on to that in a little bit because there is things sorts as lifting shoes, but again that's to create better mechanics. But with these shoes, these are good. They've got support around the heel as well. You'll find that the actual foam underneath it is a high tensile foam. In a lot of running shoes, they're quite soft and quite spongy, creating the shoe to have sponge. You're not going to be able to have as much power going into the floor as you go down. It's having a cushion effect into the sponge. Then you'll find that over time, especially, the sponge actually starts to collapse. And around the shoe itself and around the heel, if it starts to collapse, and the most common effect is the inside of the actual shoe starts to collapse the most, that's going to create more torque through your ankle joints as well. So what you want to try and do is you want to try and have a shoe that's a flat sole shoe, a hard tensile rubber along the bottom, and has some sort of support around the heel, around the ankle joint there, so it doesn't collapse. So that's probably the ideal shoe. There are a few shoes like these ones here that was made specifically for lifting and CrossFit. The shoes I have, again, were made specifically for lifting. They're a bit dirty now. And I have another one which Reebok have brought out, and it's actually a lifter shoe, so completely flat sole shoe. You often see me in my training videos wear them, and they're a high cut shoe.
They almost look like high tops.
Yeah, like a high top. They look like a Chuck Taylor type shoe. Chuck Taylors are really good as well, Converses. So anything that's got a flat sole, hard, isn't going to collapse on itself. That's probably the ideal shoe. Other shoe out there is a lifter, so an actual Olympic lifting shoe. So with a lifting shoe, what you'll find is general lifting shoe will have a slightly higher heel. What's this going to do is, with people with different mechanics, we could go on for forever with this sort of stuff. People with different mechanics and having to squat deep, so certain people that have a really, say for example someone has a really long femur and has to push right back, and what it's going to do, and say they had a short hip, what it's going to do is it's going to create a lot more length, a little bit more length through that floor to knee area, being able to sit you up a little bit more, meaning that you're going to be able to sit up a little bit higher. So people that tend to sort of really have to fold over and bend over, having a little bit of height through that heel can actually create more length in that floor to knee area.
Which is another reason why you will see people squatting with weights underneath their heels.
Not as stable, obviously, but squatting down so we can actually stay more upright. It's also helping people out that have poor dorsiflexion. So dorsiflexion is the flexion of the ankle moving forward. So if we have poor dorsiflexion here, what's going to do is our ankles are now going to start lifting up. have people with bad dorsiflexion, you can work on that a little bit. Some people have sort of certain ankle joints that don't move that far, but if you have poor dorsiflexion, having a heel, you know, all of a sudden, doesn't mean that the actual flexion of the ankle has to be as far. So compared to that, compared to that, more ankle throughout the ankle joint. So yeah, that's a Olympic lifting shoe. And how they can help create better mechanics for certain people.
And I will say, as much as I do love my pink Nikes, these do definitely make me feel more stable, and I have increased my strength a lot since I have swapped my shoes. So I'll give you that one, but that's about it. Alright, so from these questions that we've answered, we'll get onto the bar now. So now that we're in the squat rack, we're going to start by demonstrating a couple of warm-ups that we use before demonstrating the squat and the technique that we go through.
Okay, so when we're doing our warm-ups, usually we go through a four-phase warm-up stage. So first phase is your mobility work. So mobility work can range from various different things. As Sophie's holding here, you have things like the roller. So this is sort of stage one. Going through doing rolling with your up and down your spine, so through your erectors, trying to make sure that you're trying to loosen everything off slightly so you're not tight and sore going into the squat. So using the roller is a really good way of doing sort of lengthening out those erectors and sort of massaging out those erectors, going through the quad, through your ITBs, all throughout the hips and throughout the legs. Another really good technique is your massage stick. Massage sticks again are really good for breaking up tight muscle tissues, fascia, especially throughout the quadriceps. You can do throughout your spine as well, but again, I find it really beneficial and helpful to go throughout the quad, break up that muscle tissue, sort of start getting some blood flow through the muscle as well. So yeah, that's the muscles. That's a massage stick. You got your trigger ball stuff. So trigger balls really handy if you have tight hip flexors, tight in around the tight hips. You have adhesions throughout the quad and stuff. Again, just another good technique of a pressure point technique, trying to loosen up the quadriceps and, like I said, throughout the hip. So again, we won't go through any of the demonstration of it because we'll be here forever, but again, if it's something that you guys are interested in, we can do another video of that at a later time.
And if you can't get your hands on one of these, a simple hockey ball from the sports shop.
I actually prefer the hockey ball. The hockey ball is slightly bigger than your traditional and harder than your normal massage ball. So I prefer the hockey balls, but these are okay as well, sort of, especially on hard surfaces. You don't want to wreck a surface. They've got a little bit of rubber to them. Another really good technique for mobility is using power bands. So power bands are really good to be able to do a range of different things, help create a little more stretch throughout the muscle, help create space throughout the hips. So if we put them around our hips, we can actually help create some space through that femoral joint. So really good for that, creating, like I said, creating more stretch. And yeah, another really good technique to use. And there's numerous amounts of exercises that we can do with them.
With warming up as well.
Warming up with them.
What we might do on the warming up and the stretching and the rolling, we might actually do a full video on that at a later date if that's of interest again to you guys.
Because again,
there's so many to do.
Yeah, because again, even activation work with the bands really good for that as well. So trying to get those glutes firing and switching on. But we'll get into that in just a sec, because the next sort of warm-up phase that we get into is sort of your dynamic stretching. Reason why I choose dynamic stretching over your normal static stretching, what we're doing in a dynamic stretch is I'll get Sophie to sort of demonstrate here. So do some leg swings for me, just front and back. So yeah, so just doing some front and back leg swings there, both sides, also side to side. So front and back, what we're doing is we're working, helping stretching the hamstrings and through the hips and a little bit through that quad area there. Side to side, we're starting to open up the adductors as well. And what it's starting to do, good thing with dynamic stretching compared to static stretching, we're starting to create some blood flow now. Starting to push blood around through that hip joint, creating some fluid, synovial fluid throughout those hips as well. Really good for that sort of stuff. Static stretching, which is the stretching where you're holding the stretch. what that's not so great for before training is it's going to actually reduce the amount of muscle elasticity that we have. Therefore not being able to create as much power throughout the muscle, be able to move more weight. So we don't really want to do too much static stretching. Little bits and pieces here and there are good if you have got slight tightness in certain areas, over tight muscles, like if you get an over tight quadricep or hip flexors. Some static stretching is good there, but we don't want to overdo it before training. It's a bit better to do it after training than before. So yeah, so dynamic stretching, that's the main ones for the squat warm-ups. There are the basic ones if you're going to do things like bench press, basic arm swings.
We'll cover that at a later date.
Cover that later. So that goes through our dynamic stretching. That's phase 2. The next phase is our activation work. So activation work is starting to get the muscle fibers that we're using firing. The most common thing that we have is glute activation, and it's the most common one that seems to be the most lagging body part when you're squatting. A lot of underactive glutes. This is due to every day-to-day life. So from thousands of years to now, our normal day-to-day living these days, now that most people sit in a desk job, so sitting at a desk in a sort of a stretched out position, what that's doing is, because we're not actually activating and utilizing any of the muscles, especially the glute muscle, it's actually dormant in that sort of position. What happens is it's starting to get underactive. So when we go to do certain movements like the squat, it doesn't fire as efficiently as it should. So doing things to warm up, so glute bridges, again, so lying on your back, just simply moving your hips up and back. So if you're doing it standing up, but lying on the floor, really squeezing through the glutes. Things like using the bands like I had before, the power bands, and putting them around your hip area, attaching them to a point, and then moving back and forth through the hips, really making sure that that glute's coming forward and squeezing forward there. So yeah, making sure if we would use a power band, it comes around the hip or around one hip, one leg joint, coming through. And so if we'll just demonstrate by doing moving the hips backwards. So do a stiff leg deadlift for me. That's it, and then coming forward. So that's helping create more tension through, specifically through that right glute, trying to get it to activate and fire. So really important if we can get our glutes to fire more. It's the biggest singular muscle that we have in our body. If we can get it to fire, it's going to help our squat tremendously, creating more strength, more power. So that's phase 3. Phase 4 is specific warm-ups, warming up for the actual exercise that you're about to perform. And in this case, it's the squat. So the squat, pretty much from the get-go, we want to try and make sure that we have some sort of routine. I have a personal routine that every single time from the moment I walk inside this cage, or within about 2 meters of the bar, I have the exact same routine going up. Routine's really important in squat, and it's something, again, that's quite underused and so a lot of people just sort of dilly-dally and walk up to the bar any old way. If you have a routine, you're going to start eliminating any inconsistencies with your squat. So starting from a routine from the get-go, from the time that you go to walk up to the bar to the time that you walk back and squat, really, really important. If you don't have that and you have those inconsistencies every single time that you come up to squat, every single time that you go to squat from every set to set, from every day to day, you're going to have a different squat, and some days you're going to perform better, other sets you're going to perform better than other sets. So really, really, really important. I can't emphasize enough how important routine is, and that's again something that we really try and drill into all of our clients to try and sort out some sort of routine. So
that's the warming up covered?
So that's the warm up covered. So now moving into the actual how to squat.
Just taking it back a step, a lot of gyms won't have a cage similar to the one that we are performing this in. So a lot of gyms may only have a squat rack, a Smith machine, a squat stand.
So you've got those type of variations there. Ideally, we don't want to try and squat in a Smith machine. It's forcing it.
I was getting it.
What it's happening is it's forcing you to move your body around the bar, not the bar around your body. So it's forcing you into positions that isn't mechanically preferable for your body potentially, creating more force and torque through certain areas. Again, like we mentioned before in the while we're talking in front of the board there, more torque through the knees, more torque through the hips, creating more force through those areas and torque.
Okay, so before we do actually attempt the squat, show you how to demonstrate a squat, what do we need to do when we walk into the cage? What do we need to set up? How do we set it up? And what do we need to do?
Okay, so first of all, we need to start the setup with where the proper bar height is. Bar height here for Sophie potentially could be slightly too high. For me, I think it's about right. So we'll probably have to move that down in a sec. But what you want to try and do is you want to make sure that the bar is low enough so when you stand up with the bar, it easily clears the hooks. If you're having to actually lift your shoulders up and
which I'll demonstrate we'll have to do. So I have to lift it up to unhook the bar.
So if you were to do a back squat as well, it's like we're performing. If you were having to go up and go and lift your shoulders to get up and over, you're unsetting your scapulars, making it not as tight throughout the back. And we'll get to that in just a sec. But making sure that the bar height is right so you don't have to lift up tippy-toe over the racks and do it, which is unsafe anyway.
And as I was demonstrating before with a front squat, I personally even have to go even lower when I have the setup for that. But again, we'll work on front squats and variations of squats at another day. But for the back squat, so for me, this is still too high because I'm having to lift up to get it out of the hooks. So we'll just quickly lower this down.
Once we start getting a little bit of weight on the bar for Sophie, she'll have to actually lift her shoulders up to get the weight in the bar in the right position. So next thing we want to try and figure out is actual hand positioning. So hand positioning can vary from person to person depending on the actual mobility of the shoulders. So someone with a real good mobility throughout their shoulders can actually potentially bring their hands closer. The closer we bring our hands, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, is going to create more tightness throughout the back. We can actually squeeze our scapulars together a lot more. Packing those shoulders is another term for it, creating more tightness through that back area.
Which we'll show you in a minute with bar placement.
With bar placement. So bringing those hands in closer, packing those shoulders is going to create better tightness there. But for some people, shoulder mobility is going to be the limiting factor there. So moving your hands out further and further and further. You'll usually see, not always, but usually a lot of guys that are slightly bigger generally have to move their hands out a little bit wider just because they've got more muscle mass, mobility is not as great, having to move those shoulders out. But that's okay, it's working within your limitations.
For those people that don't know much about their flexibility, so where would a general rule of thumb be to place your hands? So they walk up to the bar.
So whenever I'm teaching anyone how to squat, this is generally what I want to try and do. So I'll just come in here. What you want to try and do is start with your hands out nice and wide. You want to get the bar into the position, and we'll work on the bar position in a second. Then once we're under the bar, we want to try and get that person to move their hands as close as they possibly can to the bar. Have you bring your hands back out, find out where that position is in your hands there, and potentially that's roughly where you could go, or slightly closer in than that position there. That's going to create really tightness, so when we come back under the bar, you can sort of really squeeze yourself back under the bar and get really tight in that shoulder girdle there. So that's sort of how we work out that's how I work out to get hand positioning for certain people.
As Nathan was saying before with the routine for squatting, I obviously squat quite a bit, so I know that my hand placements for me, and this is a little cue, is my thumbs, where it starts here.
Where the knurling starts, yeah.
Wrapped around, and it's equal on either side, so I know that the weight's going to be evenly distributed on my back, and that's where my hand placement personally goes.
Okay, so now that we've got our hand positioning, we're going to work on bar positioning. So what I'll do is, this is a bit of an unconventional thing, but I'll get Sophie to turn around. We don't generally ever want to try and get people to squat up and walk forward out of the rack, but this is purely just to show you bar positioning. So I'll get Sophie to move herself under the bar. So you've got two positions of the bar. You have low bar squat, which is Sophie is demonstrating here. Low bar squat is where the bar sits on the rear delt here, so it's sitting across the shoulders here. This is personally an ideal position for strength. It's going to, and the reason for that is that we're shortening the distance from the bar to the actual fulcrum point of the hip. So you've got low bar positioning, and then you've also got high bar positioning. High bar positioning is sitting on top of the traps. So with high bar positioning, there's what we're doing is there's a few different benefits and sort of things that could potentially be as disadvantage to the high bar squat. With the disadvantage to a high bar squat is that the bar sitting on top of the trap is now slightly higher. So you can see we've increased the distance up the back by a good couple of inches there. So what's that doing is it's creating, so just move back up again, we're creating more distance from the bar, which is where the weight is, to the actual hip point, so the fulcrum of the hip, which means generally we're either going to have to push the bum back, which isn't safe, or have to sit up a lot more straighter, which can be a good thing, but then we're going to create more torque at the knee as well. So that's the low bar, that's the high bar position. The benefit of a low bar, so the low bar positioning, again, now we're starting to shorten that distance between there. Our leverage is now starting to become greater. So the shorter the distance between that point and that point, greater leverage. What we're also being able to do now is being able to be able to really contract and pack those shoulders a lot greater. So tighter through your back region here means that you're going to be more stable throughout the core, means you're going to be stronger, you're not going to fold as much. So I personally like the low bar positioning, but using the variation of both in your squat can help improve different parts of your squat. So you can definitely work in high bar squats from time to time, or if you prefer to be a high bar squatter, working low bar squats from time to time. So so that's a little bit on bar positioning there. Now what we're going to work on is the actual walkout position. So how we actually get from the bar being on the rack to the bar being, or getting into your actual squat position before squatting. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'll get Sophie to demonstrate here. Usually what you want to try and do is you want to try and limit the amount of time it takes and energy it takes for you to get into that position. That's generally by trying to take as little steps possible to get into position. If you're sitting there walking around and trying to constantly move in and around, you're wasting energy getting into squat position, which is vital energy that you could be using for the squat. So I'll get Sophie to demonstrate that, and I'll stand behind her here.
So my hands go on the bar.
She gets a nice tight positioning in the back here, so she's using a low bar squat position here. She stands up, she wants to take 1, 2 steps, and maybe a little slight adjustment on the third step there, if she needs it. So from this position here, so positioning here, then what we're going to do is we'll move into the squat. So we'll move into the squat now. So from the side on position here, what we want to try and do is, we'll see how the bar path is now sitting, like we spoke about before, is sitting in a center line of gravity here. So we don't want the bar path to travel forward, and if it travels back, she's probably going to fall over. So we want to try and make sure that this bar path here stays in a perfect line to that center line of gravity there. So the way to do that is, what we want to try and do is, we've got 2 ways of moving down to the bottom. There's bending at the knee and bending at the hip. What we want to try and implement first is we always want to try and make sure that we have a break at the hip slightly first. What's this doing is, where there's a lot more strength and muscle around that hip joint than there is around the knee joint, there's a lot more stability around here. If we break at the hip first, what's going to happen is straight away we start switching on the erectors, switching on the glutes, switching on the hamstrings. If we can start getting those muscles firing first, it's going to mean that we're going to have greater stability through that core area, through that spine area, and hopefully less chance of injury as well. If we bend at the knee first, so break at the knee first, what's happening is, say if we had 100 kilos on the bar, 100 kilos of torque is gone straight into that knee, because there's no weight going straight through the hip vest, it hasn't had to switch on yet. If we break at the knee, straight away, 100 kilos of torque straight to the knee. If we can limit the amount of torque through the knee, like we mentioned before, a little bit greater on this, and put more of the emphasis into the glutes, ideally we should be a little bit stronger there. So
I break at the glutes.
So we want to break at the glute here. So if we break at the glute and then come back up, So it's good there. So we want to try and make sure that we keep pushing that hip backwards. Sophie's got the kind of ideal mechanics for a squat. She's got quite a long torso here. She's got in a fairly normal sort of length of limb through her femur and through her actual heel to knee area as well. So floor to knee area. So her mechanics for squatting is quite good. So for someone else, they might, like I said, we mentioned before, they may have to push their bum further back, or knees might have to travel further forward, certain things like that. So one thing that I will show, and I'll show from the side on position here, again going back to why we want to break at the hip first compared to breaking at the knee first, reducing injury risk. If we break at the knee first, I'll show you what happens. So for me, I have to move into I've actually got not a very long torso, so I've got a sort of a shortish torso. So for me, what I have to do is I actually have to get more of a bend over. So you'll see at the bottom of my squat, once I actually get to the bottom of my squat, I'm in quite a bent over position here, making sure that my actual erectors have to work quite hard to hold the weight. So what happens is, if I break at the knee in this position here, breaking at the knee, what happens is my back straight. To get any lower than this position here, because my knees have traveled as far as they possibly can, I now have to start pushing back through my hip. This can potentially probably be a little bit more risk on the actual spine, just because all of a sudden you're asking, say again, I had 100 kilos on the bar. If I have 100 kilos on the bar, 100 kilos goes through my knee, my spine's not having to work. Then if I start having to push my hip back, all of a sudden I'm asking my spine to start holding onto 100 kilos of weight halfway through the movement. So this isn't really that ideal. And again, like I said, could potentially put more torque through our spine, through our erectors, creating injury.
Awesome. So just on that as well, where should your head be? Where should your chest be? Where should your eyes be focused?
Okay, so with the what Sophie said, so our head, our chest, our eyes, generally speaking, it can change from person to person. Generally, you want to try and keep a neutral position, so neutral position throughout our whole spine. So that's working from our hips all the way through to our neck. Ideally, you want to try and find a spot that's eye level or slightly higher. What this going to help is it's going to help lift our chin up, especially at the bottom of the squat. So if we're squatting, what we want to try and do is lift our chin up. That's going to help create the chest cavity to rise up. The greater to have the chest cavity up, the less chance of our chest cavity folding and the weight falling forward on us as well. So chin up, eyes up, and yeah.
Okay, so let's run through a spot with you cueing exactly how you would in a normal everyday strength coaching session here at Hold Your Own. So we'll start with the bar's set up.
Yeah, okay, so find your hand positioning there. That's it, so make sure that you get under the bar nice and tight. Create that tightness through your back.
So now I've got my correct bar positioning and I'm performing a low bar squat.
So nice and tight through that back there area. You want to stand up, now take your steps back, make sure you get your feet positioning right. Feet positioning is going to be different to different people, and we can talk about that in a sec. So get your feet positioning here. Okay, what we want to show you to do from this position here, we're nice and set, we're nice and stable. You want to take as big a breath as you possibly can in here. That's it. Set your tightness throughout your back again. Break through your hips. Now knees out and up we go. Good. So big breath in. Break at the hips back and up. Good. As soon as we hit that bottom position, what we want to try and do is create a jumping sort of position. So we want to try and get to the top as fast as possible. So big breath in. Break at the hips. Knees out and up. Good. And run for me. Okay, good. So what's that doing is with the breath, like we spoke about a little bit earlier, we're creating more space and more actual volume inside that chest cavity, creating more core stability. The few cues that you may have heard me say there, so trying to jump at the bottom. So if you were to jump, you don't try and jump slowly throughout the bottom. What happens is when you jump, or you try to jump, you're creating more power. Power is strength times by speed. If we don't have the speed there, we're going to lose out on a lot of power. So trying to make sure that we can create that power so we can move more weight. The more weight that we move, the more amount of reps, the more muscle we can potentially grow. So trying to jump from the bottom all the way through to the top positioning there.
So is it slow down, fast up? Is that the way that you sort of teach clients?
We want to try and make sure that we have some sort of controlled movement. That's dependent on the person. If someone feels like they've got control and they move a little bit faster than someone else, that's perfectly fine. It's however you feel comfortable going down with a certain amount of weight. You'll often find some people with a lighter weight will go slower than, will go faster when it's lighter and then slow down as it's fast. You really want to try and make sure that your speed through every single weight is exactly the same, because then you're again creating that consistency. There's not going to be any inconsistencies when you move from weight to weight.
Whilst we're talking about that control, let's talk about the failing on a 1RM. So when we were talking before about 1 rep maxes and testing your strength, how would you fail in a bar that is set up like this in a cage?
Okay, so something that's really, really important, and again, that we get all of our clients to sort of demonstrate or try and learn is failing the squat. Failing the squat can teach people how to safely get out of a dangerous position. So when you start to fail a squat or you start falling in a certain way, you want to make sure that you can bail out in that squat so you don't injure yourself. The best way is a lunge way. So I'll demonstrate this. So from the side on position, I'll get into the position and then I'll show you how to bail out, and I'll say why I did it that way. So as I'll get under and I'll set up and so if I was to squat from this position here, what I want to try and do is big breath in again, break at the hip, get into that position, knees out, and then as I come up, you say if I can't get it and I'm not quite strong enough to get from this position here, the easiest way to get out of it is purely to throw the bar off your back. So just take a knee is pretty much the easiest way to do it. You're trying to just do a nice lunge forward and it will safely fall off your back without actually injuring yourself. If you were to have the bar fall forward, numerous things can actually go wrong from that position when you fall forward on the bar. Things like hands getting trapped in the racks, potentially
injuries,
the bar
injuries.
rolling over your neck, causing neck and head injuries again. So trying to stay away from that sort of failure point and trying to let the bar just throw off your back. Obviously, you have to be careful when you do it inside certain gyms. Some gyms are going to frown upon it. You always want to make sure that you have your safeties in place.
And that they're set at the right height as well?
So set at the right height, you want to make sure that they're just low enough so they're not quite touching the bar as you get to your deepest part of your squat, but not so high that they do touch the bar and could throw you off balance slightly.
Okay, so we're running out of time here today, so let's just quickly give you guys a little bit more information on the strength and how to increase your weights. This is something that I do get asked every single day. How do you know what weights to go by? You don't follow the next person, you don't choose a professional fitness model or powerlifter and just jump straight to their weight. So how do you increase your weight?
Okay, so like we slightly mentioned before, we want to try and find out our 1RM, our 1 rep max. So going and finding out your 1 rep max is quite important. So once we find out that, working sets and working weights, you want to work off a percentage of that weight. That percentage could be anything. So say if you're working off 60%, you're pretty safe to be able to do anywhere from 1 to 30 reps really. If you're working off 70%, you're sort of working towards that sort of anywhere from a maximum of around 15 reps. And these are rough guides. 80% you're sort of working around that 10 rep, 90% you're starting to get to around that sort of 3 RM rep.
And you mentioned before that every week you should be increasing your strength. So by how much? 2.5 kilos, 5 kilos? How much should you be aiming for?
Whatever's comfortable for you. So just as long as you're showing some sort of progression. Like I said, it could be that you lift the exact same weight from one week to the other, but instead of going 4 sets of 8, you could go 4 sets of 9. Or you could go stick at 8 reps, because if it was hard, add in another set. All of a sudden you've increased the amount of volume that you've done for that day. And then when that weight feels comfortable at that amount of reps, if that's the amount of reps you want to be performing for that day, you could potentially go up by 2.5 kilos or 5 kilos. or if you work in pound, you could work up in 2 pound or 4 pound or 5 pound, whatever it is.
Awesome. So just to recap again, guys, first things first, set up your bar, warm up, mobility, hand placement, bar placement, feet in the right place, break at the hips, knees, and big breath in.
Okay. One thing I just want to go over, one more thing is one thing I didn't, and I'm just going back towards the squat now and how to squat, I've just come to mind. You would have heard the cue of me saying knees out in the squat.
Such a good point.
What's this doing is, what you'll find is a lot of people, and I'll move to the side here, when people are squatting, you'll find that their issue is trying to get depth. So when they're trying to get depth, what happens is if they don't have your knees spreading apart and their knees are starting to collapse inwards, what you'll find is the actual hip joint will get caught. To get any lower than this, what happens is your back now has to fold around your legs, around your hips, just to get that extra little bit of depth that you need. So what I was saying to Sophie when she was sweating before, knees out, what that's happening and doing is it's creating more space in that hip joint. So from here, knees out, it's creating more space so we can keep more upright in our body. Knees go out and we get to that squat position in a little bit more of a comfortable way, and then we want to try and explode back out at the bottom. So that was the knees out point that I was marked before for the cues.
And a lot of people do find that when they are lifting heavier, their knees tend to cave in a bit as they're on their way up, and a simple knees out cue will push their knees out and be able to drive all the way up.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. So I feel like we've covered all of our topics here today, and thank you so much, guys, for joining us. Make sure you do let us know if there's anything else that you want us to cover, and we'll make sure that we do move on to the variations of squats, from front squats to back squats, and everything in between shortly. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.